All right, hi everybody. So we're going to do the next lecture video, which was going to be upper limb muscles. So for upper limb muscles, we're going to do a couple of things. One, we're going to create a whole bunch of charts to help us with upper limb muscle movements. And we're going to start with the scapula, and then I'm going to work on those synergist charts for the movement of the upper limb. And then I want you to think about, again, synergistic muscles, antagonistic muscles. Remember, synergistic muscles are muscles that all perform the same action. And then the antagonist is the muscles that actually do the opposite action. So I'm going to get rid of I'll keep my video here just in case. But we're going to start with the scapula and the movements of the scapula, and then what muscles do those movements. And basically, I've removed those muscles from this image here. This is the image that I gave you guys in class. And then I asked you, what movement is each of these arrows performing? So you want to not only think about that, but you want to think about what muscles are going to be performing those actions or those movements. So let's go through and review each of these actions one more time. And I don't have probably all these colors. Maybe I have all these colors. We'll see. So this light blue action, remember, is elevate. So think about elevating your shoulders up. And then we have this dark blue, which is depress. Okay. Then we're going to look at our pink here and our red. So remember, pink was going to be retract. And then the actual red arrow is protract, so pushing forward. And I got to remember, I got to leave a little bit of room right there. So my greens are actually going to be rotation. So this is rotation of the scapula, remember, not rotation of the head of the humerus. So that means superior rotation is when you're bringing your arm all the way up. That's because the scapula is actually rotating the glenoid cavity all the way up. So this is our superior rotation. And then inferior rotation, remember, you had to already be superiorly rotated, and then you're going to do inferior rotation as an antagonistic action. Okay, so let's start with the easy ones. I know you're thinking they're not easy, but the easier ones and the rotation ones, okay? And we're going to use a couple of little sayings that maybe I got from some of the other students during office hours, where instead of this being elevate, we're going to call these elevators. And that's going to help us with a couple of things. We're going to remember LEV, and LEV is going to help us with levator scapulae. So remember, levator scapulae helps us elevate. And then we're going to use the T here for trapezius. And lastly, we're going to look at the R right there for rhomboids. So remember, these elevators have L, T, and R in it. Then that can help you remember levator scapulae, trapezius, and rhomboids. For depress, we're going to change this to depressants. I know that's not really how it works, but it's going to help us with remembering which muscles are doing this. Because we're going to need a P and a T. Well, actually, we need a P. We already have a P here, but we need a T to help us. So we're going to remember the P and the T of depressants. And we're going to see that we're going to have pectoralis minor. So I'm going to write that here. And then we're going to have trapezius that are going to do those two actions. Okay, so pectoralis minor and trapezius are helping us pull our scapula downward in depression. And then we're going to look at retract and protract, and I only have one color for these ones, sort of. And we're going to call our retractors just retract, okay? And we're going to use the R and either of the T's to help us. The R represents rhomboids, And the T represents trapezius. To help us remember, retraction is done by those two muscles. And then when we look at protract, we're actually going to change this to protractors. So again, protractors are going to help us with a couple of things. I need a P and I need an S. I mean, I guess you could say this protracts here instead, where we have a P and we have an S here. And the P is going to be for pectoralis minor. Let me go back and rewrite that really quick. So we have pectoralis minor, and our S is for serratus anterior. So those two muscles are helping us protract or push our scapula forward, okay? So hopefully some of that kind of helps you a little bit with remembering which muscle does which of those actions for the scapula. So superior and inferior rotation are going to be a bit more complicated. So I'm going to draw 2 extra scapulae. I'm just going to basically draw a triangle to help me. And I know it's in the opposite direction as the scapula that I have on my picture here. Is because that's the way I always draw it. So that's just the way that I'm going to remember how to draw it. I should say that's the direction I always draw it in. So that's how I'm going to remember. So I'm going to use this and I'm going to do superior rotation and inferior rotation. And when I do superior and inferior rotation, I'm going to put a little rotation arrow here on my scapula. Because I want to remember, right, that my glenoid cavity has to go upwards in superior rotation. And this is going to help me where I start that circle, basically, and where I'm going to end, where my arrow should point upward. And I'm going to do this because I'm going to start my circle here. And then again, my circle comes this way, right? And then my circle goes in that direction. And hopefully this helps you remember that for superior rotation, you have to do 1, 2, 3. So you have to contract these muscles in sequential order. So in 1, 2, 3 order. So number 1 is going to be a T here. Number 2 is going to be a T. And then number 3 is going to be S, because this is trapezius, right? So the superior portion of trapezius is going to help us lift it up a little bit. And then we're going to see that the inferior portion of trapezius is going to start to pull it down. So I know this is the hard part about scapular rotation, but you have to see how this is going to elevate slightly. And then since we're across from the glenoid cavity, when we pull down, the glenoid cavity goes in the opposite direction, just like turning a wheel. And then you continue to pull basically the glenoid cavity upward a little bit by pulling the rest of the scapula downward. So you're gonna have 2 portions of trapezius that pull in opposite antagonistic actions before you hit serratus anterior, which is also going to help us with depression. Or I'm sorry, help us protract it, like pull it forward a little bit. Like that. Because serratus anterior is, yeah, protracting, and then it also does protraction, just does protraction and superior rotation. Then when we look at inferior rotation, so technically the scapula has already been pushed upward. I'm just not going to draw it upward. And what we're going to see is that the glenoid cavity now has to go downward. So when I draw my arrow, I want to make sure that the end of my arrow ends up pointing downward like that. And let me redraw my arrow really quick here. I'm going to so I'm going to start right here. So I'm going to see that that muscle is going to contract first, and then this muscle is going to contract, and then there'll be a muscle that contracts in that direction. So we're going to see that this is 1, this is 2, and this is 3. This is rhomboids. Okay, so because rhomboids are opposite of the glenoid cavity, what we're going to see is that as we pull up the medial border of the scapula, then the glenoid cavity goes in the opposite direction. And then as levator scapulae is going to pull up on the medial border as well, again, the glenoid cavity is going to start to dip more. And as it dips more, then what we're going to do is we pull it downward. We're going to depress it more. By depressing it forwards, we depress it and protract it using pectoralis minor. Okay, so you can add those things here on superior and inferior rotation, those three muscles in like sequential order to basically finish out your scapula movement chart. So I hope this part, like going over and making this chart with you guys, helps a little bit in terms of scapula movements, because it's probably one of the more complicated parts of the arm. And then I'm going to make separate videos for how the humerus is actually moving in the glenoid cavity. Okay.